Welcome to Pinsar Basketball Live. This is going to be a very, very special edition of Pinsar Basketball in which I'm not going to do a lot of talking in this one. This is going to be largely carried by the Raptors head coach, Darko Rajakovic. First of all, to any Serbians out there, Merry Christmas to you guys. This is our Christmas today. January 7th is, according to the Orthodox calendar, this is our Christmas. So I could think of no better way to celebrate our Christmas than to discuss the man at the helm of the Toronto Raptors rebuild, which is Darko Rajakovic, one of the most esteemed, most well-respected development coaches in the league. I have spent many a night wondering how well the G League Ignite program might have been had someone like Darko, someone with his vision and his experience, helmed that program or been at the leadership position of that program. Might players like Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Scoot Henderson, etc., because would they have been better players? Largely because I think that young players need accountability. I think they need guidance. I think they need encouragement. I think they need principles, and I think they need manageable tasks. I think they need a goal, and I think they need to meet those goals. And in order to do that, it's part basketball knowledge, but also Josh, Dimitri, Merry Christmas to you as well, man. How are you doing? So I think that in order to understand Darko, one of the things that we did when Darko was first hired was we looked at a very old interview of Darko from when he was with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I believe, whether correctly or incorrectly, that we spearheaded this entire notion of Darko is about 0.5 offense because he spent a lot of time in that interview talking about 0.5 offense and Monty Williams and the Phoenix Suns and how they choose to play basketball. So I think that once again, we can spearhead the movement on what Darko believes in as a development coach, how he believes in developing players, because everywhere around Raptorland, this is the conversation. The Raptors are losing, but they're developing. Players are, of course, struggling, but they're getting better. What does that actually mean? What does it look like? What does he believe? So let's take a look at this. This video comes from the Serbian Head Coaches Association, and it's condensed. If you want to listen to the entire thing, I will link it in the description afterwards. But here is the video, and we're going to stop and we're going to pay attention to certain key parts. But I think that you will overall get an understanding of this. Now, two options for you guys, and you can let me know which you prefer. If you prefer to hear Darko's voice in Serbian with the translations below, we can do it that way. If that becomes somewhat tedious for you and you just don't want to hear it that way, what we can do is we can mute the audio and I can just read out the translations. Okay, so let's start with Darko Rajakovic talking about what he believes in.
Odličan primjer je naš Nikola Jokić, igrač koji je u drugoj rundi drafta, talentovan, ali taj talent ne bi značio ništa da nije bilo izuzetno kvalitetnog rada prvog trenera i stručnog štaba u tom timu. Potrebno je pronaći mlade igrače, potrebno je razvijati mlade igrače.
I want to stop this for a second and just point out one thing. A lot of people have taken to talking about how the Raptors pieces fit together. This is probably the wrong approach. Let me just take this off for a second. And I just want to talk about this briefly because I remember to myself just right now that I wanted to bring this up before we even get into this conversation. Today, I read a post on the Sporting News about Luka Doncic potentially wanting out of the Dallas Mavericks, and potentially because Luka is a really big star player and the Dallas Mavericks would be looking for pieces to put in place to be competitive with the pieces they already have. They obviously have a very veteran-laden roster. And I'm not saying that the Raptors could make a move for Luka or that they would want to or that he's available or that he would ask out. But in the event that a Luka does ask out, how do you get him? You get him through draft capital. You get him through young players. And one of the proposed deals was Emmanuel Quickley plus Grady Dick plus Jacoby Walter plus 5 first-round picks for Luka Doncic. Now, obviously, you could argue that certain teams out there could probably beat this offer, teams like the OKC Thunder, teams like potentially the Brooklyn Nets. But really, in the future, when you look at these misshapen pieces on the Toronto Raptors roster, whether you're talking about an Ulrich Shamshe, whether you're talking about Jonathan Mobo, whether you're talking about Jacoby Walter and Grady Dick and RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, whatever you're talking about Ochai Agbaji on his next contract or potentially even in this trade deadline, what you're talking about is players that ultimately you are developing either for yourself or to be traded. And at some point, if you're going to trade pieces, you're going to have to make them look good. You're going to have to develop them. You're going to have to take some of these pieces that maybe other teams have sort of soured on, and you're going to have to turn them into something. I look around the league at players like Jabari Smith. I look at players like Patrick Williams. I look at players like Scoot Henderson, high lottery picks that maybe haven't worked out. Could you bring some of those players in potentially if you identify one of those players as not being correctly used, like the Raptors did with an RJ Barrett, and make them significantly more valuable for you? Even if you're not talking about turning a misfit piece into a superstar, could you at least turn a misfit piece that is barely a role player into a very good role player? That, I think, is the upside with youth. And I think that a lot of the, you know, maligning and the complaining around Raptorland is, hey, these pieces don't fit together. Well, maybe they don't fit together, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe you're not trying to make them fit together. Maybe one of your strategies is to lose basketball games while having a whole bunch of pieces that don't necessarily work together, but then ultimately being able to swap out pieces that don't work together for pieces that do, right? It's kind of like what the Raptors did with the Raptors championship. How soon we forget. Pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock led to Norman Powell's ascent, led to Fred VanVleet, led to Pascal Siakam, led to Jakob Poeltl, led to Jonas Valanciunas developing into starting center. I mean, none of these things were guaranteed when they happened, right? DeMar DeRozan's success was not guaranteed. Kyle Lowry's success was not guaranteed. These players developed. They developed, and then they were traded. A lot of them were traded. The rest who weren't traded became supplemental or complementary pieces for the championship. Terrence Ross became Serge Ibaka. Terrence Ross plus a first-round pick. Jakob Poeltl and DeMar DeRozan became Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. And so you have to, at some point, understand that development is not just about, oh my God, are we locking in long-term to RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and Scotty Barnes, BBQ? Well, I'll remind you, the young guns. Amir Johnson wasn't there. Sonny Weems wasn't there. DeMar DeRozan wasn't there. Ed Davis wasn't there. None of those players that we initially thought were going to be the core of the Raptors in 2012 were even there when the Raptors won the championship. The pieces will move around. It helps that those pieces get better. Let's get back to Darko.
Ja nisam od onih koji veruju igrač je ono što jeste, tu nema promena, tu ne može ništa se uradi. I daću vam nekoliko primjera igrača u našem timu koji su napredovali u segmentima igre, koji su izuzetno do nas trenera. Neke od prvih vežbi koje ću danas pokazati sa ovim momcima bit će završenci i polaganja u reketu. E sad, u tom segmentu najvažniji i najbolji šut koji igrač može da ima. Znam da ste svi upoznati da analitika u NBA-u sve veću važnost ima. Najbitniji i najbolji šut koji igrač može da ima jeste šut sa linije slobodnog bacanja. Taj šut donosi 1,53 poena po posedu lopte. To je ubedljivo najbolji šut.
I want to correct the translation. It says 1.53%. It means 1.53 points per possession. It's going to make this mistake a few times.
Najbolji šut koji igrač može da ima je šut u dubokom reketu, unutar kruga. Taj šut donosi 1,39 poena po posedu. Sljedeći najbolji šut je šut iz kornera, 1,13. Sljedeći najbolji šut je šut iznad kornera, znači ove trojke sa kapice, i taj šut radi 1,0.
I want to point out one thing. Scotty Barnes is having his most efficient year from inside that circle that he alluded to, his most efficient year from the free throw line. Last year, he had his most efficient year from the corners. This year, he's having his most efficient year from above the break. So slowly but surely, you are building Scotty Barnes into a very elite three-level scorer. This is a really important thing. When you look at the progression that we've seen from Emmanuel Quickley, you'll see that Emmanuel Quickley's finishing has been a strong focus. In New York, he was perfectly content taking floater range shots. With the Raptors, he's being asked to go inside. We saw OG progress on this. We've seen Grady progress on this. And of course, the number one thing is taking shots before you're ready to take them. Later on, you're going to see a drill where he talks about a player going through contact. We'll certainly look at how he works with these players, but I think it's going to be really telling. The reason for doing this is because I don't believe that Raptor fans get the insight into Darko as a coach. Unfortunately, we have a lot of clueless media members who do see some of these practices but don't even know what they're looking at. They wouldn't have the slightest clue. So the best way to get Darko to explain his strategy is to have Darko himself explain it, as opposed to having numbskulls try and interpret it.
Šut van unutar reketa i van ovog kruga, šut sa bloka, tu zonu zovemo blok, taj šut je svega 38% i taj šut je 0,90. A ubedljivo najgori šut koji u NBA-u može da neki igrač uzme, bit će šut van reketa unutar linije 3 poena. Taj šut donosi svega 0,85 poena vrednosti.
This is the shot that RJ Barrett has basically been banned from taking, which is the long two. It is also the shot that Scotty Barnes is pretty much the most efficient at as a rookie, but now is struggling from. So it's interesting to note that moving Scotty closer to the basket is increasing his percentages, even though initially, as a rookie, we saw him shoot very, very well from like 21 feet. Scotty was great 18 to 21 feet. So that led a lot of people to think he could become a better three-point shooter. They're trying to convert all those 17 to 22-foot shots into either above the break shots that drive people crazy, or those midi turnarounds where he's been absolutely dominant. I'll show you Scotty Barnes' shot chart later in this episode. I think you'll be pretty impressed with how well he's done from the deep mid-range. But ultimately, I think that the goal of most stars is to get closer to have as many of their shots coming in that 1.1, 1.12, 1.2, 1.22 points per possession. This is where you get into the 60% range, okay? And that's where you get into like the 90th, 95th percentile as a scorer. And ultimately, the goal must be for a big playmaker and a physical, specimen like Scotty Barnes. The goal should be that most of his shots should yield above league average production.
Sada, jedna utakmica u NBA-u, 48 minuta. Utakmica ima između 94 i 100 posjeda. U proseku 97 posjeda po utakmici. Sada, kad saberete selekciju vašeg šuta, da li šutirate iz reketa, da li šutirate iz dubokog kornera, da li imate mogućnost da dođete do linije slobodnog bacanja, sve te stvari itekako utiču na konačni ishod, na broj poena koji ćete postići na utakmici. Pre 3-4 godine, kada je Phil Jackson još uvijek bio sa New York Knicksima, njihov napad je bio trougao koji promoviše većinu šuteva za 2 poena. Jako najefikasniji šutevi imali su jedan od najgorih napada u NBA-u. Sa druge strane, pogledajte Houston, sa druge strane pogledajte Denver, Golden State, a kraj krajeva i naš tim, dosta šuteva za 3 poena, dosta šuteva u reketu. Sad, prodori i napad ka košu. Ja dok sam radio u Europi, bit ću iskren, nisam polagao nikakvu važnost ovim šutevima u blizini koša. Bilo je dvokorak, tvoj posao je treba da daš taj koš i to je to. Međutim, dolaskom u razvojnu ligu, dolaskom u NBA, shvatio sam kolika je važnost tih poena. I u mojoj prvoj godini u razvojnoj ligi imao sam igrača, Reggie Williams, koji je igrao i u Evropi, koji ima 8 godina u NBA-u. Analitički sve kada radimo i kad gledamo naše igrače, ne gledamo na osnovu jedne utakmice. Gledamo jedan čank od 10 utakmica, jer je to veći broj posjeda, veći broj situacija koja može donesti neke rezultate. Sada, Reggie Williams je većinu svojih šuteva u blizini koša šutirao iz blok erije i njegov procenat šuta je tu bio oko 40%. Pokazujući mu video, jednostavnim razgovorom sa njim, radeći vežbe, zadatak je bio za njega svaki put u prodoru da nagazi liniju ovog polukruga i da završava na obruču. Njegov procenat šuta u drugom kvartalu od 10. do 20. utakmice skočio je na 64%. To je uticalo izuzetno je uticalo na efikasnost našeg napada. Sad, jedna bitna stvar u Evropi imamo tendenciju da kažemo on ne može da uspije. 18 godina, to je to. Lako se odričemo igrača. U NBA-u je sasvim druga priča. Evo, tu je Marin Silaček koji radi u NBA-u preko 20 godina i jako dobro zna, kao i većina vas, da ono trenutka kada igrač dođe u NBA, to je novi početak za njega. Znači, da li je to igrač od 18, od 20, 22 godine ili u slučaju našeg Bogdanovića sa 25 godina, on je ruki, njemu se daje prostor za napredak. Nikoga ne požuruje u tom razvoju. Svi žele da taj igrač napreduje. Svi žele da taj igrač podigne nivo svoje igre na sasvim drugi nivo i postoji mnogo poverenja, mnogo rada i mnogo ulaganja u tu vrstu igrača, jer nije lako naći igrače, nije lako razvijati igrače. Sada, naš tim imao malo specifičan program rada u razvoju igrača. Kako to ostali timovi rade, ne ulazim u to. Mi smo preuzeli neki model koji je sličan sa Antoniju. Šta to znači? Znači da svaki pomoćni trener u stručnom štabu ima jednog, dvojicu, trojicu, četvoricu igrača sa kojima individualno radi svakoga dana.
We've seen this a lot with the Toronto Raptors. We've heard that Ivo Simovic is assigned to certain players. Obviously, you're matching certain players to certain assistant coaches that have their best, the best way of connecting with that player. They have a specific program. Obviously, guys like Jacoby and Grady are going to be working together. Naturally, Ochai, Grady, those guys are going to work together. Potentially, guys like Emmanuel Quickley are going to work with guys like Jamal Shed. Similar things are going to be worked on with similar players. Naturally, you're going to have, and this is why you need veterans. This is why you need a Bruce Brown. This is why you need Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Poeltl and guys like that, because they are tone setters and they are people who can help, right? So when you're looking at players who could potentially come in and help the Toronto Raptors going forward, you may have to think about players like that, right? And casting Evo is a real one. Yeah, he is. He's a really, really good dude, man.
Neki timovi imaju dvojicu ili trojicu trenera, player development trenera, koji rade sa igračima, a ostali pomoćni treneri su sa glavnim trenerom u kancelariji, sastanče, gledaju video, ali nisu na terenu sa igračima. Mi ne verujemo u to. Mi želimo da svaki od naših pomoćnih trenera bude svakoga dana na terenu sa igračima, da razvija odnos, poverenje, da može da utiče na njihov razvoj i istovremeno treneri, mi koji smo u stručnom štabu, znamo šta naš prvi trener želi. Stil igre, na čemu želi da razvija, gde vidi da su problemi, tako da možemo svakodnevno da komuniciramo sa našim igračima. Sada, kada prođe draft, kada prođe free agency, kada imamo naš roster, prva stvar koju radimo jeste dolaze igrači u naš sistem. Za svakog igrača imamo 6 koraka koje prolazimo da bismo izvršili player development, da bismo izvršili razvoj igrača sa tim igračima. Prva stvar jeste gledanje videa, video analiza, razgovor sa igračima, razgovor sa trenerima iz prethodnih klubova, da vidimo njihova iskustva sa tim igračem, razgovor sa igračem, da vidimo šta on smatra, koje su njegove jače strane, koje su njegove slabije strane. Čak to ne zovemo ali slabije strane, zovemo to limitacije, neki prostor na kome on treba da napreduje i da se razvije u budućnosti. Znači, prva stvar je vidjeti gde je taj igrač, gde je prostor za njegov napredak, kako želimo tog igrača da iskoristimo u našem sistemu. Razlikujemo dve vrste veština, dve vrste skillsa. Imamo prva stvar, core skills ili osnovne veštine, to je nešto što svi igrači od pozicije 1 do 5 treba da rade. Pas, utrčavanja, zagrađivanja, neke bazične stvari koje svi igrači na poziciji 1 do 5 treba da rade. Imamo druge stvari koje se zove system skills, odnosno veštine koje trebaš da imaš u sistemu da bi mogao da igraš u našem sistemu, da bi mogao da budeš na terenu sa Russell Westbrookom, koje su stvari da bi mogao da koegzistiraš sa njim na terenu. Isto tako za drugu petorku šta ti igrači u drugoj petorci treba da rade.
This is something that Jonathan Mobo got a really serious talking to about the last few weeks. which is specifically getting out to the free throw line extended and taking those threes, right? Making sure that he's in the corners and he's not passing up those shots. This is something that Scotty's having to work on as well, taking those above the break threes when they're available to him. Getting Scotty to believe in that is a really important thing, because what people don't realize is Scotty actually being a threat out there is a huge help to his teammates, because one of his teammates, actually multiple of his teammates, cannot shoot from out there. So being the player who is tasked with that. Now, obviously, if you want to think about this from a perspective of winning basketball, having Scotty be your only non-core shooter, right? Someone who, at least in theory, is your worst shooter out there, and putting 4 really good shooters around him would allow him to operate with a lot of space in the low block, right? Having a stretch big out there like a Miles Turner, right? Having someone like that and having a couple of movement shooters, maybe even a corner shooter in there, that would create and unlock a lot of advantages for Scotty Barnes. Don't have that roster right now. Don't have that luxury. Instead, you have a big who's consistently parked on the opposite block. You have a big who's constantly camping out in the paint, who does a great job of trying to screen away and trying to block out and trying to get offensive rebounds, but ultimately is still a spacing nightmare. And Scotty is navigating that challenge by taking threes. You take a look at Ochai Agbaji, right? Not a very high volume 3-point shooter, but a much improved 3-point shooter this year. You take a look at someone like RJ Barrett, someone who's much more willing to take those open threes now that they're available, creating more consistent diet of his open threes. And you'll see, even going back to last year, that some of his best games have come when he has taken 3 or 4 of those threes in the corner when they're open and available to him. You are trying to build players who can actually thrive on all systems. This is the most important thing. What people didn't realize last year when the Raptors were doing that thing with Pascal Siakam, putting him in the corner, look at him playing with the Pacers right now. What do you see? I see a lot of Pascal in the corner. I see a lot of Pascal above the break. Getting him more comfortable with his new role in the NBA post Nick Nurse, which would be star second option, was very, very important to boosting his trade value. Now, because he didn't buy in, his numbers looked kind of shit and the Raptors didn't get a great return, but it was a really good shot in theory to try and do that. And also, I think that it was a really nice experiment for the Toronto Raptors to see if Pascal Siakam could be a long-term fit for them as well. It's always about trying to accomplish 2 things at once, right? Jonathan Mobo becomes a better 3-point shooter. It not only helps you, but it also helps potential team that's looking to trade for Jonathan Mobo. They can have, but if he remains a non-shooter, if Ulrich remains a non-shooter, if Jamison Battle remains a stationary shooter who doesn't create well off the bounce, these players become somewhat limited in the roles that they can serve on other teams. So I think that it is very, very important to understand that you're building a system that is ultimately designed to play to create basketball players for all systems. That is the best way to develop.
Sljedeća stvar, kada obavimo taj prvi razgovor i kada vidimo evaluaciju igrača, druga stvar je postavljanje ciljeva. Znači, samo rad, pojaviti se na treningu i danas ću da radim ovo, sutra ću da radim ovo, to ne postoji. Postoji plan i program jasan, a isto tako postoji cilj. Kod postavljanja ciljeva, u prethodnom ovom iskustvu 6 godina sa Thunderom, imali smo u početku 3, 4, 5 različitih stvari, sada smo stavili samo na jednu stvar. Šta smatramo da je za tog igrača ubedljivo najbitnija stvar? Ne želimo da ograničimo trenera, ne želimo da ograničimo igrača, da će raditi samo na toj jednoj stvari. Ali kada igrač ima jednu stvar koju zna da će svakoga treninga da radi, kada zna da to će biti svake utakmice gledano od strane trenera i ocenjivano, kada zna da u toj eri mora da napreduje, postoji mnogo veća odgovornost od igrača, postoji mnogo veći i bolji buy-in. Svakoga dana će tome pristupati jako, jako ozbiljno. Posle svake utakmice ja imam stvarno veliku sreću da radim sa trenerom Bilijem Donovan koji nama svima u stručnom štabu daje veliki prostor za rad sa igračima i komunikaciju svakodnevnu. On nama dozvoljava da, i naš je posao, da individualno gledamo video posle svake utakmice, da radimo sa igračima, da razvijamo igrače u našem sistemu. Sad, daću vam jedan primjer. Pričali smo o šutevima sa bloka, gde je procenat šuta svega 38%. To je prosjek za cijelu NBA ligu. Mi imamo igrača u našem timu, to je upravo bio njegov procenat šuta kada je došao u ligu, Steven Adams. Svi njegovi šutevi iz ove zone su bili 38% u njegove prvoj sezoni. Ovo je bila njegova 5. sezona sa timom, njegov procenat šuta je iz te zone sada 58%. Neke od vežbi koje ćemo proći danas sa visokim igračima su upravo vežbe koje Steven Adams apsolutno svakoga dana radi sa svojim trenerom i svakog dana posvećuje pažnju tome. Kada postavimo cilj za igrača, da li će to biti za Steven Adamsovi šutevi sa bloka, da li će to biti za nekog igrača polaganja, da li će to biti za nekog igrača neki defanzivni zadatak, obavlja se razgovor sa igračem. Znači, igrač neće moći da napreduje, neće moći da uradi dobar posao ako nije upoznan šta je cilj i šta treba da radi. Sljedeći je pravljenje akcijnog plana, koji će to biti sistem vežbi. Jedna velika stvar koju sam i sam promenio, koju sam naučio u radu u Americi jeste imao sam naviku da radim jednu vežbu i da radim tu vežbu dok je ne dovedem do savršenstva i da imam 20 ponavljanja dok mene to ne zadovolji. Nisam previše razmišljao kako to utiče na igrače. To sam apsolutno promenio.
I want to say that Darko has done a tremendous amount of work individually with a lot of these players. One player that is consistently, two players actually, Ochai and Jamison Battle. Those two players have worked a lot with Darko, and you can see it in practice every single day that Darko is working with Jamison Battle. They have a long belief that Jamison Battle will ultimately become a core piece for this team, even if it's like an end of bench piece, a guy who only plays 12, 13 minutes like a Jake Laravia. And I believe that what the Memphis Grizzlies are doing right now, where they play like 11 deep, 12 deep almost every single night, something that the Warriors have also experimented with, I believe that the Raptors are going in that direction as well. I believe that as soon as next year, when the Raptors get a little bit deeper, a little bit healthier, you'll see as many as 11 to 12 on every single night. You're going to see those minutes be down. You're going to see, I don't necessarily even think you're going to see those gaudy numbers from Scotty that some of you want to see, like 28 points per game or something like that. In the playoffs, I assume the rotations will be a little bit tighter, but this is something that's new in the NBA this year. We're seeing a couple of teams experiment with this. This was done last year in Europe as well by a couple of teams successfully. And I think that, with the type of effort that you have to play with defensively to play on this team, I think going 11 to 12 deep would be a really smart one, and also keeps a lot of guys engaged. I mean, again, it's been done for years that rotations are typically kept from 8 to 10, unless you're a Tom Thibodeau team, in which case rotations might be kept to 7 or 6. But overall, this is not really good. I mean, we have seen over and over the Tom Thibodeau teams tend to burn out. They tend to be really tired. They tend to get injured a lot. We've seen this where shortened careers long term. We've also seen players get disgruntled. They become deactivated when they're not playing. Players who play a lot are typically tired towards the end of the game. It's a huge advantage if you can play a little bit deeper into your rotation without necessarily compromising your end results. That way, your stars are a little bit more fresh, and they're maybe a little bit more active defensively to close out a game. How much of a benefit is it that the opposing team's star has played 42 minutes and your star has only played 32 minutes? I mean, minute 33 versus minute 43 is a huge difference. So I think that overall, you're going to see this progress into something very good. And I think Darko is much more than just a development coach. I do think sometimes that is very difficult when you speak Serbian, like to express yourself in English. I was literally listening to my friend the other day who is Serbian, and we were speaking in Serbian, and I noticed her speaking in English to somebody else, and I noticed how much her story changed from when she was telling me the story to when she had to tell it in English, how different that particular event was and how she constructed it. Sometimes it's really difficult to articulate yourself in your second language. So I think that it is actually, these translations are very, I would say, like very accurate. So I think that it is a very good thing to see Darko speaking in his native tongue. And yeah, he still believes a lot of this stuff. Yeah.
Umjesto da radim jednu vežbu i 20 puta ponavljanja u toj vežbi, da li će to biti dvokorak ili šut ili bilo šta tehnički, samo jedno ponavljanje. Tražim jedno savršeno ponavljanje, ali svakoga dana će igrač da vidi tu istu vežbu. I umjesto da radim jednu vežbu 20 puta, ja ću da radim 20 vežbi po jedan put. Jedno ponavljanje, brzo, instinktivno, stvaranje dobrih navika, kako to treba da radi, šta to radi za igrača. Igrač prvo neće mu biti dosadno, zna da sljedeće ponavljanje će biti nešto novo, ako ga uradi kako treba. I njegov nivo svesti je na jako, jako visokom nivou od samog starta. Peta stvar u našem programu jeste merenje ciljeva. Charting. Znači, ne samo video, ne samo subjektivno šta trener misli o toj vežbi, da li si uradio dobro ili ne, već prezentovati igraču brojeve, analitiku, da li su dobar posao uradili ili ne, gdje se nalazi. Kada igrači vide da postoji napredak u njihovom razvoju, da jedne nedelje su šutirali taj procenat šuta, da sljedeće nedelje je bolji, da sljedeće nedelje je bolji, oni će da imaju apsolutni baj. To je mnogo velika stvar, imati tu vrstu poverenja sa igračima i da igrači vide da mogu da napreduju.
How important is it that when a player goes and gets drafted to the San Antonio Spurs, that Greg Popovich has that reputation of, this guy's going to make you better. Look what he did with this player, this player, this player. See, almost every coach in the NBA can make you better. I mean, they're not typically telling you things to make you worse. I mean, some are total basket cases and maybe a few are incompetent, but the vast majority of NBA coaches will make you better. In theory. In practice, it's more complicated. Some of them have difficult personalities. Some of them don't communicate well. Some of them turn you off with their personality, and so you don't really hear what they're trying to say. Some of them, they don't hear you. They don't meet you on your level. They don't hear your concerns. They don't establish trust. What I'm hearing from Darko and what I've heard about him and what I've seen with him over the last year and a half is basically that he values the element of meeting players on their level, understanding players before speaking to players. And this is a huge fundamental, bridging element of all human interaction. I'm not going to connect with you. I'm not going to be able to change your life unless I can connect with you first. I can't connect with you if I won't listen to you. I can't listen to you if I don't care about you. You're not going to listen to me if you don't think that I care about you. You're not going to be listening to me if you think all I care about is myself. So ultimately, it comes down to this, right? Number two is what you're doing working? Why should I listen to you? Now, if somebody calls you up tomorrow and they say they have a way to improve your business by 10%, right? And then they help you improve your business by 10%, but there's no evidence of it. You just feel it intuitively, or you don't really track it. You don't really chart it. You're not really good at that stuff. Well, then maybe their advice won't work. But what if you do chart it? What if you do chart your business growth properly, and every single thing you implement, you actually chart, and you're able to see it? You're able to see it working in real time. You're able to see that growth, that development, and you're saying, okay, well, the three things this person suggested, they boosted this element of my business by 8%, this person by 10%. I need to pay this guy more. I need to bring him on as a full-time consultant. Well, that's the same thing with Ochai Agbaji and Darko Rajakovic right now, right? So Ochai comes from, a pretty good system in Utah where he had Will Hardy, comes from a really good coach, Bill Self over in Kansas. Ochai has been very, very well coached throughout the last, few years. And when you look at that, you think about, how do you connect with that player, right? Because obviously nothing has worked for Ochai so far. I mean, he did win a national championship in Kansas. He was very successful. He did get better, but he stagnated tremendously in Utah. And so now you're trying to convince Ochai to listen to what you have to say about the finishing. And so you're going to show him. You're going to show him a chart. You're going to show him video. You have to first be invested in understanding that what the player thinks matters. This is a psychological approach to approaching basketball players. You're not going to be able to convince them to listen to your solution unless they first agree that there is actually a problem. You show them the problem through video. You show them the problem through the analytics. I've worked with a few trainers, with basketball players, and they have players in D1 or whatever, and they'll ask me to do some charting data or whatever, and they will be convinced that their client is like this elite mid-range player. And then I go chart, 16 games worth of possessions. And I'm like, this is the efficient zone. This is the inefficient zone. And they'll be able to take that chart to their player. And then now the player has it in front of them. They can't run from it anymore. It's not a feeling thing anymore. It's not like, oh, but that big game shot. No, no, no. You shoot 18% from there. The fact that you hit a game winner from there is irrelevant. The data sort of crushes the narrative. It changes the narrative. If Scotty thinks he's a great shooter from a particular zone, all you have to do is show him the charting data that shows him that he's not. That 2 feet left is where he needs to score from, or that the area that he thinks he doesn't need to work on because he's fine. Well, the numbers say you're not fine. It's hard to argue with numbers when they're staring you right in the face. And I think that it's very important to not be demeaning or condescending when you do this. Obviously, you present it with the best of intentions, but it is to learn. Most NBA players want to learn. Most of them want to get better. Most of them want to get paid. Most of them are looking to hire people who are basically, right, looking, I have seen NBA players who are willing to hire, outside help in order to understand their own game better, in order to get better. They're willing to hire trainers, they're willing to hire nutritionists. These are not people who are inherently lazy. These are unfortunately people who are just often mishandled and people who are lied to one too many times. So it's really important for the Raptors to develop Darko Rajakovic as in and of himself a brand, because whoever you draft next year is going to have to trust this guy with their development. He has to have that established root and reputation. And in order to do that, he has to be consistent with his players. He must hold them accountable. He must produce. The production is important. See, because what y'all don't realize last year is Malachi Flynn was trade fodder. He was being dangled. Chris Boucher right now is being dangled. We make it there's no secret about it. Chris Boucher has been on trading block for God knows like 2.5 years at this point. How you're treating those players counts. In terms of your, street cred or your coaching cred in the locker room, what you're saying and the fact that you are working with players that clearly you have no long-term plans for, that do not fit your system, bodes very, very well for me if I'm looking at this from the vantage point of a Scotty Barnes or an Emmanuel Quickley. How you treat Davion Mitchell, how you communicate with Davion Mitchell that he's not going to be in the rotation matters to me. I need to trust that you're operating above the belt. Davion Mitchell and Chris Boucher are not in the lineup right now. Did Darko blast them in the media? No. Did he take shots at them and say they're not very good players? No. Did he let them find out the game of that they were not in the rotation? No. He had those meetings with them before, told them, hey, this is what it's going to be for the next couple of weeks. I want you to keep your head down. I want you to keep working. In a couple of weeks, if we see it, progressing in the play groups, this is what I need X, Y, Z from you in order to get back into the rotation. And then boom, now you leave it in their hands. But at least now they're not saying, oh, I found out through the assistant coach, or I found out during the game that I wasn't playing. That's how you break trust with players. What a lot of coaches don't realize is that maybe they treat their stars with a certain amount of respect and maybe their core pieces, but how you treat that 13th, 14th, 15th guy, how much you're pouring into that player, it has a way of rubbing people off the wrong way. Because if you think about it, I'm looking at this from the perspective of the guy who's 8th in your rotation. You're talking to me because you're playing me. And I'm just looking at the guy who's 12th in your rotation and you haven't given him the time of day. You won't meet with him. You don't communicate his minutes to him. You won't, and you won't talk to his agent. You're not willing to even talk to his trainer. You have no relationship with him. I'm looking at him. I'm looking at me and saying, at what point are you going to do that to me? You know what I mean? So this ethos of just treating people well, meeting them on their level is very, very important. And everything you're getting from this video is that he really cares that players care. He really cares about putting players into a state where they are feeling like they are participating in their development, which is a very underrated part. And every time the media or, fans try to dispel this notion of Darko being a good coach, I feel like it is sort of undercutting what we are trying to do here as a Raptors, organization. At the Raptors organization at the core are trying to develop these young players. It's harder to develop under a person that is being constantly criticized and scrutinized in the media space, right? So I'm glad that he's at least gotten that reputation as a good development coach at the very least. We'll see when it comes as a head coach, but yeah.
Primer igrača u našem timu, Enes Kanter.
Good example.
Analizirajući video i analizirajući njegovu igru na post-upu, svaki put kada je primao loptu kod nas, kada je oba stopala kada su bila van reketa i kada je igrao leđima ka košu, da ne bitno da li je njegov šut ili šut njegovih saigrača, mi smo postizali 0,9 poena po posetu, što je jako nizak broj za igru na post-upu. Svaki put kada je primao loptu sa jednim stopalom unutar reketa, to bi skočilo na 1,3 poena po posedu lopte. Vrlo prosto, jednostavno, cilj je bio svaki put da njegov prijem lopte da uvek ima jedno stopalo u reketu. To smo doveli kod njega na post-upu do 80%. Njegov prosek poena sa 12 skočio je na 16 poena po utakmici u toj sezoni sa nama. Poslednja stvar jeste razgovor sa igračem, dobiti feedback od igrača, šta on misli o tome, kako on vidi napredak svoj, gde vidi prostor za svoj napredak u daljem radu i ocena urađena. Možda sam već rekao, svaki 10 utakmica imat ćemo ocenu urađenog i vidjet ćemo šta je sledeći korak. Sada, vrlo kratko, ja znam da je ovo jako različito u odnosu na Evropu. Naš trening će biti u 11 sati svakoga dana. Prvi igrač dolazi u 9 sati ujutru. Svi u našem timu izuzev Russell Westbrook. Ovo je vrlo interesantna priča. Moja prva godina sa timom, bio sam u razvojnoj ligi, bio sam glavni trener i u predsezoni imamo taj sistem da treneri iz razvojne lige provode vreme sa tanderom, sa glavnim timom. Sada igrali smo u predsezoni prijateljsku utakmicu u Wichita, koja je nekih sat i po vremena leta daleko od Oklahoma City-a. Završili smo utakmicu u 11, preslačenje i tako dalje. Sleteli smo u Oklahoma u 3 sata ujutru. Moja prva godina. Želim da se dokažem, trening je sa trenerom ujutru u 8:30, ja ću budem prvi sutra u kancelariji, pojavit ću se tamo u 7 sati ujutru. Posle 3 ili 3,5 sata spavanja, dolazim ujutru na teren, čujem lopta na terenu, ulazim unutra, Russell Westbrook znojav. Russell Westbrook je već došao ujutru u 6:30, bio na terenu, ubedljivo prvi. I to je ono što čini u našem timu, kada svaki ruki dođe ili novi igrač, kada dođe u naš tim, kada vidi njegove radne navike, niko drugi nema drugu opciju nego da radi na isti način kao što on radi. To je ono što je nešto specijalno za naš tim i što nam daje jako mnogo prostora za jako bitna stvar, zdravlje igrača. Vidite koliko puta u play-offu da timovi ne mogu da naprave sledeći korak jer je neko od igrača povređen. Postoji monitoring, postoji kondicioni treneri, postoji dizanje tegova, postoji rad to u sinhronizaciji sa trenerima. Uvek kada izađemo sa našim trenerima u poziciji 1 do 5, kada izađemo na teren, ovo je prva vežba i ova će sve traje 3 minuta u zagrevanju. Ovo jeste zbog košarke, ali isto je tako zbog motorike. Kakav će položaj kukova biti, angažovanje mišića, položaj kolena, prevencija povrede. Znači, vrlo proste stvari koje ćemo raditi ovde utiču na angažovanje tih mišića i prevenciju povrede. Ove slične stvari će raditi u teretani kada budu sa svojim kondicijnim terenima, ali onda kad jeđu na teren, iste stvari će raditi sa nama. Ajmo da krenemo ovde, Lazo, sa linije ove bele. U stavu oba stopala, znači u širini ramena, kolena ne smeju da idu ispred nivoa prstiju, angažovanje gluteusa, ulazak u stav. Iz ovog položaja jedan korak napred, ostavi u balansu, podigni desno gore korak, idemo u šut. Tako je. Pronađi balans, pa tek onda idemo u šut. Znači, ostane u tom položaju 2-3 sekunde, pronađi balans i onda u šut. Tako je. Drugo stopalo. Balans, šut. Tako.
And now you see how Jamison Battle and Grady Dick and Ochai Agbaji are getting so much better, how Scotty is getting so much better. The footwork that Scotty exhibited last night on the turnaround over Brook Lopez is insane. It is so different than what he was doing last year or the year before or the year before. Progress is felt in those small jumps. And it is through this process of one repetition at a time, one perfect repetition, and then move, move, move. This evolved way of thinking is how the Raptors are getting better. And you're going to see all the players getting better. You're going to see Jacoby really, really thriving. And yeah, hopefully at some point I can have Eric on again, which is Jacoby's trainer, and we can talk Jacoby Walter. Maybe at the end of the season, we'll talk about him. But Jacoby is a player with a very, very, very bright future under Darko. Like he is, I think he's one player that is going to shock a lot of people. I feel like people look at him very differently because he was a 19th overall pick, but I fully expect that he could start for the Raptors in place of maybe a much seemingly right now much better player, but I think in the future Jacoby and Scotty works very, very well. So yes, it's moments like this in practice, hundreds and hundreds of moments like this. And the beautiful thing about Jacoby is he's so coachable. Like he's so insanely coachable. He's a sponge. Ulrich is a sponge, right? Jamal Shed is a sponge. So you've got all these young players. You obviously tested them before they came into the system. You figured out that they were workers. You figured out that they were receptive. You figured out that they had a good rapport with your head coach. And now you have your head coach working with them. And obviously, if you're Scotty Barnes or, Jakob Pertl, you're Emmanuel Quickley, and you're seeing every single day that your head coach is working with the undrafted rookie and making him better day by day, you have to respect that.
Sad idemo sljedeća vežba. Korak napred, korak u stranu, pronađi balans, tek onda idemo u šut. Ostane nisko, lopta je na grudima, ne spuštaj loptu dole, šut. Druga strana. Druga strana, znači ništa ne radim. Ako daš koš, idemo odmah na sljedeću vežbu. Nema ponavljanja iste stvari dva puta. Daš koš, idemo sljedeća stvar. Sljedeća stvar, idemo korak napred, korak nazad, pronađi balans, dižemo se u šut.
Now do you understand why I call the Raptors games VR missions? See, video games work in the exact same way. Why do you play video games for 10, 12 hours? Because there's the promise of moving on to the next level. You see what I mean? Practices can be either enjoyable, they can be activating the mind, or they can be deactivating the mind. When you have a practice like this, where a coach is literally showing you step by step how to do a particular, repetition, and then occasionally they are also introducing the variable, right? The variable repetition. So it's not the same thing every single day. You are actually training the mind to recall these things. Whereas, unfortunately, when you just do the same repetition of the same thing over and over and over again, you're actually wasting time because that's not game rep. There's no game in which you're going to come off the exact same thing, the exact same way, the exact same shot 85 times. That's the stupid thing about these, the way that we train players and way a lot of old school players, old school coaches train players, because it's just simple to say, okay, 16 baseline cuts, 16 pull-up jumpers, 25 above the break threes in a row. But it's like, what if you introduce like variables, right? When you see Steph Curry doing the light test, right? When Steph Curry's doing the light test, what is so special about that? It's constantly forcing your mind to be activated. Darko is talking about activating the mind here with the one step, one repetition, move on, move on, move on. And it's not the same 20 repetitions every single day, right? So right now you're going to see him introduce something different, and it's going to force the player to think a little bit and be like, okay, what did he just say? That keeps the mind engaged. As long as the mind is engaged, there's absorption and then there's retention. See, it doesn't matter if you teach a player 1,000 things and then they forget 999 of them when they leave the gym. That's a useless way of teaching. And I feel that too many North American teachers prescribe to that way of thinking, because that's the way North American teaching is done, even at the school level. It's memorize, 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 right? Repeat, repeat, repeat. How did you learn how to write the letter A? A 5,000 times. How did you learn your multiplication tables? A times A is 64. But it's like, did you ever flip it? Did you ever have to introduce the variable? Did you have somebody who was like giving you the randoms? And it's like, Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll give you the perfect example. What letter comes after G? Right? A lot of people don't even know that. You know what they have to do? They have to go back and be like, okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Okay. You know what I mean? That's how they have to do it. But it's like, what if you were just taught the alphabet the wrong way? What if you were taught your multiplication table the wrong way? I believe I was taught the multiplication table the right way, which is why I can tell you what a fraction is relative to a percent. It changed my life that I had a great teacher when I was growing up. And honestly, European teaching, not to sound all pretentious and, somewhat rude about it, it's just better. It's just better than North American teaching, and this is why the players are getting better.
Lopta je na grudima, korak nazad, balans, šut. Ok, idemo na sljedeća noga. Sljedeća noga je ista vežba. Nema veze ako si promašio. Da. Leva napred, vraćaš sa desno nazad. Tako je. Balans, šut. Tako je. Nema prostora za taj šut ovdje. Koliko se ja sećam, Final Four je bio u Beogradu pre mjesec ili 2 mjeseca ovdje i zahvaljujući Bobby Dixonu i njegovim šutovima iz driblinga za 3 poena, Fenerbahče je ušao u finale. Potrebni su nam igrači koji mogu da rade ovo. Da li će ovo svi igrači u timu da rade? Apsolutno ne. Da li sa svim igračima treba da radite? Da. Jer ja ne znam da li Nikola ili Mateja mogu ovo da rade, ako ih ja ne stavim u te situacije. Na kraj krajeva, rad na ovim elementima tehnički će samo da tehnički i taktički će poboljša igru ovih igrača i da imam. Primjer igrača u našem timu, Aleksa Brindes. Šuter. Dajem mu loptu, on će šutira trojke cijel dan i šutira će jako visok prostora šuter. Sad, u radu ove stvari koje smo radili sa njim, dolazi situacija da je preuzimanje, dolazi situacija protiv Memphisa da ga čuva na sol i on je sposoban da napravi jedan dribling da stigne šut jer ima dosta prostora tu. Na početku sezone nije bio sposoban to da uradi. Postoji mnogo prostora za razvoj ovih momaka i za razvoj svih igrača na svakom nivou. Smo ok sa ovom vežbom svih. Znači, vrlo kratko, treba da čitamo stopala, ako odbrana otvara stopala ka košu, to je direktan produkt. Ne može da uzme sve. Ne može da uzme i liniju 3 poena, ne može da uzme i desnu i levu stranu. Nešto će biti otvoreno dobrim čitanjem i ćeš sposobno da ga napadneš u 1 na 1. Ajmo posljednja vežba ovdje 1 na 1. Ajmo krenuo sa linije slobodno bacanje. Ovo je jedna od mojih omiljenih vežbi u igri 1 na 1, pogorit ćemo se nazad, znači sa linije slobodnog bacanja. Tvoj cilj je, prva stvar koju treba da radiš jeste promenama i direktno driblingom da izađeš brzo van linije 3 poena. Ako on ostane tamo nazad i igra lošu odbranu, imaš dobar šut i diži se. Ako zaustavljate close-outom ovdje, napadaj ga. Ako ti uzme jednu stranu, imaš prostora napada na drugu stranu. Kada se dešavaju ove situacije, analizirajući Steph Curry i njegovu igru, opet pričamo o najboljim. Njegova igra je napad, odbrana ga zaustavi, nema ništa, promjena iza leđa, raširi teren ovdje i sad treba donesiš odluku. Da li će dozvoliti igraču da šutira iz driblinga, jer njegov šut iz driblinga je 46%, ili ćeš da mu oduzmeš prodora. Da bi oduzeo prodor, mora da skočiš na jednu i na drugu stranu i samim tim igraču koji je 183 visok, dozvoljavaš prodore ka košu, direktne prodore ka košu i završenite na košu. Jer ne možeš da uradiš jednu drugu. Ne postoji obramen igrač u NBA koji može da oduzme i liniju 3 poena i da čuva 1 na 1. To ne postoji. Možeš da donesiš odluku defensivno što ćeš raditi jedan i drugi. Najbolju odbranu što možeš. Njega poznaješ šta sve igrač u timu. Ajde, zaustavi ga tu da ne da koš. Ajmo. Ok. Jedno pitanje opet. 2 stopala u reketu. Kada si rešio da ga napadneš, da li si išao oko njega ili si išao kroz njega? Ajmo kroz njega. Tako je. Ajmo kroz njega. Brzo.
Important to note the question being asked, right? So easy to give people answers, so difficult sometimes to be willing to hear the answers. So, for instance, I teach, I have taught a lot in my life. And one of the things that I loved doing when I was teaching, and honestly, it takes one to know one, they say that a lot. I believe that I was a very, very good teacher. I believe I was a very good tutor. And I believe that the results spoke for themselves. I mean, the parents still write letters to this very day saying, God, my son got into MIT. My son got into, my son got, we're talking about kids who were really, really struggling. These kids were not stupid. I refused to approach any discussion with this child is dumb or this child is stupid. I chose to approach every situation with this child is struggling. And then I tried to do my best to understand why they were struggling. And that usually started with activation. That started with a lot of questions being asked. And so instead of saying this thing that you're doing here, this is wrong, I would actually ask, why do you think this is the way it is? And what do you think you did wrong here? And then I'd force them to use their own mind to say, okay, well, I did this wrong. That allows me not only to understand where they are at, but it also allows me to activate them. It allows them to be active in their own, participating in their own teaching. See, it's very easy when you're a teacher to say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Teachers love doing that. They love crossing everything out and check marks and whatever. This is stupid. This is a stupid way of teaching. The best way to teach, in fact, is to activate the learner so that the learner is participating and therefore they don't feel like they're being oppressed. They don't feel like they're being talked down to. Actually, they feel like they are actually participating. It's like a joint exercise. And while this does erode any sense of power dynamic that you may want to exert over this person, the question then comes, why do you want to exert the power dynamic anyway? Do you not know that you are the coach? Do you not know that you are the teacher? Do you not know? Do you need to consistently have to remind them with your big X's that you are the teacher and they are the student? Why can this role never reverse? So when you ask a student a question, why do you think this? This is not diminishing your role as a teacher to listen to them. It actually would help you understand what they misunderstood and what you were saying. So this question of did you go through him or did you go around him allows the player to actually understand what they're doing. It would be the similar thing with, for instance, if you create a drill. Let me just pull this off for a second. Let me just give you an example of something that I would do with a young player. Okay, so one of the things that I would do with a young player would be read and react stuff, right? So we create two pylons, right? Maybe 4 feet apart, and I would have 5 feet apart, 5 feet apart, two pylons, one defender in that gap, and then I would force the guard who is dribbling to, if the player is to basically that they have to score within. If they're going to drive, they have to drive within those two pylons. There's no avenue to get outside those two pylons, and the two pylons, of course, are representing help in the gaps. So now it puts the onus on the defender to play a certain way. And obviously, if the defender is going to sag off a little bit too much, then you can shoot, right? So there has to be the threat to shoot. So in the event that, let's just say the defender is playing up and the player takes a tough shot, instead of saying, no, 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 this is wrong, I would actually ask, why did you take the jump shot? Like, what did you see in that situation? Not even like in a condescending sort of way that sort of turns the player up and makes them defensive, but rather just ask the question, what did you see in that coverage that made you want to take the jump shot as opposed to attack the hip or attack the side? He opened up left. What did you see? And maybe that player would say, okay, well, I didn't really see it that way. This is what I saw. And then we can go to the tape and we can look at it. Or we can do the exercise again with the player raised up in the focus of, what am I looking for? This is what we're talking about, right? You want to make players better at basketball. It's not going to be through endless repetitions of the same frigging thing over and over. You have to understand at some point that the players who aren't getting better in the NBA, it's not because they're not attending shoot arounds. It's not because they're not getting shots up. There's a dated concept in the NBA that the best players are just going to get better by taking 500 shots a day. But if your mind is not activated during those 500 shots because, you're just not in it, because there's no goal, because there's no presence, because you yourself are mentally somewhere else, those 500 repetitions will mean nothing. They will mean nothing. You have to approach your workouts with intentionality. You have to approach it with a goal. You have to have like almost like a video game. You have to have like, okay, if I do this, then I can do that. If I do that, I have to do this. There has to be decision making baked into the learning process. You have to learn, to teach players how to become thinkers as opposed to androids, right? So this is what you're trying to do, is you're trying to make players better decision makers. You're trying to make players more intellectual. Part of this comes off the court stuff. You're going to give the players books to read. You're giving them material because you are impressing upon them with every interaction that your goal isn't just to make them a better basketball player, is actually to make them a better person, to make them a better business person, to make them a better family person. And this goes so much beyond just learning how to shoot or learning how to dribble. This is creating better people. And I have yet to meet somebody. I mean, that's not true. I've met one or two people, but very rarely will you meet someone who will find somebody else is actively trying to make them better in all facets of life, and they'll reject that. Players usually and people generally are very, very receptive to being coached. You just have to find a way to access it. Okay. Once again.
Bežiš od njega, nemoj da bežiš od njega, kroz njega, nemoj da se plašiš. Ajme. Evo ga, stiži gore, bravo, odlično, bravo, odlično. Kroz njega. Tako je. Sad, stvar za koju se ja zaključim igrači, kako ću ja kroz njega udarit ću, da on će udariti mene, neko će sporediti. Nisam vidio tu situaciju. Nisam vidio da je neko napao nekoga i da se desila neka povreda. Ne dešava se. Jer ovdje čini da se povuče ili u potpunosti da ti oduzme taj prodor. Ti želiš da ti oduzme prodor. Kada ja idem ovdje iza i čita njegova stopala i napada ga, ti želiš da ti on oduzme to. Jer ti imaš counter za to na koju on ne može da reaguje, može napaći na drugu stranu. To okej? A probam još. Direktno kroz njega. Tako, na njega, evo, bravo, duboki rek, idemo. Ok, idemo. Hajme još. Ok, dobro, smo okej s ovim stvarima. Ajmo dvojica visoki, ajmo da vidimo za visoki malo. Ovo je za aplauz za ovo što rećemo malo. Obećao sam na početku predavanja Steven Adams, njegova dnevna rutina i stvari koje on radi. Znači, vrlo prosto jednostavno, floteri za visoki igrači. Znači, sve je veća potreba da visoki igrači, pozicija 4-5, naravno i bekovi, da mogu da završavaju preko visokih igrača. Znači, kada dolazi ovdje odbrana i taj igrač zaustavi, umjesto svakog puta napadati igrača, ako razvijemo taj floter da bude dobar šut, to je izuzetno opasno oružje ovdje. Znači, prva vežba će biti stopala paralelno, mi smo se u stavu, ja imam loptu, čim ti dodam loptu, brzo se dižeš gore u koš. Kada daš jedan koš ovdje, pa će budeš ti, onda će vas pomeriti na 45, ste imali na drugu stranu. Ajmo, nisku stavu, brze ruke. Idemo, ako sljedeći. Brze ruke. Idemo. Dodajte loptu koji je ovdje. Brzo. Tako, sad. Floter nije skok šut. Znači, nemoj da se dižeš gore, da zadržiš loptu i onda da šutiraš. Milan radi odlično, ti možeš da radiš samo brže šut. Znači, baci tu loptu. Ajme što da vidim. Baci loptu po koš. Tako je. Ajme što, daj koš. Tako, sljedeća pozicija. Brzo, stopala su spremna, brzo. Diži gore. Tako, sljedeća. Brzo. Tako, ok. Znači, to je prvo.
Do you see just immediately how much better the players are getting? And I'm not gassing it up. What I'm trying to tell you is this is the approach. You can feel the energy. You can feel that there's no angst or frustration. There's just moments and moments. There's encouragement. When there's not encouragement, there's discipline, there's accountability. There's no bending of the standards. There's not like, okay, well, shoot it however you want to shoot it. It doesn't matter if it goes in or out. There is the accountability. Obviously, there is the goal setting, But once there is the goal setting, there is support, there's guidance, and then there is celebration when you actually do it. This is how you teach. 100%. This is how you teach.
Pet pozicija, dva koša dati za svakog igrača. Sljedeća vežba je nešto, budi gore molite na penalu. Ovo je položaj ovde. Bacaš pas, direktan pas, ide od parketa svejedno, dok je lopta u vazduhu, brzo okrećeš stopala, kukove ka koš, dižemo se u flote. Ne skače napred, ne skače u stranu, dižemo se direktno ka koš. A ja ću gledati loptu. Ajmo u stranu. Idemo. Brzo kukovi, brzo uši gore. Bez skoka napred, nemoj da skačeš u obranu, direktno gore, bravo. Tako je. Ok, idemo još. Ok, ajmo sada pozicija ovde, u ovom položaju. Znači, repliciramo i pričamo o poziciji pick and rolla, otvaramo se.
Now what happened? 2 missed shots in a row, and then an immediate redirection of the energy and the focus, moving away from the thing that they were not doing well to the new exercise. They showed that they could do it well. Then it got a little bit repetitive for them. They lost focus. They started to overthink. Obviously, when you start missing floater range shots, it's usually a focus thing or a repetition thing. And now you move on to the next thing so then you don't become discouraged as, oh my God, I lost it. You know what I mean? So much of shooting baskets, like if you've ever played basketball at any level, you understand that at some point you get on a streak, you hit 4, 5, 6 in a row. And it's at that point that you need to encapsulate that good feeling and move on to something else. You need to move on to another zone. You don't need to keep going until you brick 4 in a row and then feel bad about yourself. Now moving on to the next thing, let's see what he does. I haven't watched this actually. Yep.
Brzo ga proši. Tako, idemo. Baci loptu. Tako, bez zadače prođeš.
Perfect.
Znači, svih 5 pozicija. 1, 2, sredina, 45 druga strana, koridor. Brzo šuter. Ok. Sljedeća stvar. Ajmo krenemo ovde iz kornera. Ja držim loptu na liniji penala. Trčiš ka meni, dodajem ti loptu. Brzo stopala, nećemo se u šutu. Isti šut, loptu. Trči ka meni, brzo gore. Tako. Idemo, brzo, hop! I direktno dobro, bravo, odlično, bravo, brzo skok podiraš, odlično. Isto ovdje, znači isto prodora, primaš loptu, sada je catch and react. Čitaš moju poziciju, ako sam na donjoj strani, jedan dribbling floater, ako sam na gornjoj strani, jedan dribbling floater. Opet završamo sa floaterom. Hop! Ajde samo nemoj da bežiš od mene, direktno ovdje, rame o rame. Rame o rame, direktno kroz mene. Hop! Opet držiš od mene, nemoj se plašiš. Udari me ovdje rame, ajde slobodno. Tako, idemo gore, snažno. Ajmo, snažno. Hop! Tako, flot. Ne prilazi prebližu u koš. Hoću floter, završetke iznad gore. Ajmo. Hop! Odlično, može iz zakucavanja, ali nema floter vlasa. Okej.
Okay, so I hope that has been somewhat informative in hopefully letting us see a little bit of how Darko coaches. I remember personally one of my favorite coaches in Raptors history who is often, remembered as a bit of a sourpuss that people didn't like was Kevin O'Neal. And I had a coaching session with Kevin O'Neal because he was running a coaching clinic and I was a youth basketball player. And I really found defensively, he changed my life for, a couple of years. I employed all of those skills and it was largely because I liked him. And he took a shining to me. And I really felt like I connected with his message about how to move my feet, how to switch my hips, how to take charges, how to attack the basketball defensively. He was quick to correct. He was hands-on. He was really hands-on, and that helped me. He was like, come, hit my chest. And I drove at him. He fell over, took the charge, and I'm like, damn, this old man, he's like feisty. That's the type of coach who can make you better, honestly. The coach who just kind of sits there, dictates, corrects, criticizes, shouts out instructions from the sidelines, kind of sitting there, has bad energy, thinks they can just go through the motions. That's not the coach that helps a young team. The coach that helps a young team is the guy who's willing to get out there, who's willing to get energetic, who's got great energy, who keeps the energy up in the practice, who's giving you constant feedback, who's that's the important thing. So I hope that yes, what's not to love? You don't? That's cool. Yeah, I've chosen to become a better person. And this year I am, making an internal promise to myself that I'm not going to be overly reactionary to stuff. Like it's fine. I'm not moving anybody off of the pole that they already stand on. It's perfectly fine. If you don't want to support Darko, if you don't want to support Scotty, that's perfectly fine, man. In the end, we're all going to be right or wrong anyways. Love this super chat from Cast2929. I believe in Darko. This is just great live. Just curious, how many languages can you speak fluently? W content, W community. I can't wait for the draft. I speak 4 languages fluently. Okay. All righty. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a great night. Enjoy yourselves. We will catch you tomorrow for the Raptors post-game live. And then the next night, the Raptors have a back-to-back against Cleveland. So this is going to be 2 very, very tough challenges against New York on the road and then Cleveland on the road. Not easy. How many more seasons of quickly developing a point guard with the Raptors are reasonable before it's unlikely he becomes an all-star level point guard? Says Dylan Shu. So first of all, thanks a lot for the super chat. I don't think Quickly needs to become an all-star level point guard to justify his worth. I think he provides a tremendous boost. Sorry, my headphone just keeps getting disconnected. I think he provides a tremendous boost to the Raptors spacing. I think he works really well off of Scotty. I think there's obviously some progression there that's going to have to happen, but he's a really hard worker and he's proven himself to be the type of player who does get better year over year. He's not a player who's going to stagnate and get, nobody who like I have a good read on players. I tend to have a pretty good read on players. I try to take players at face value when they say something. I tend to believe them, unless they're Fred VanVleet. But I think that he's a player who can get tremendously better, and I think that he's a player who is going a little bit away from his strengths right now, just like Scotty is, in the hopes that he will develop into a more complete player. I don't know about all-star. I reject this notion that he has to be this pure point guard in order to succeed in the NBA. I think he needs to continue doing what he does well, which is score the basketball. I think he needs to continue evolving as a playmaker, but also become more of a downhill threat. He doesn't have the burst or the athleticism, that elite court processing that De'Aaron Fox and John Morant and guys like that do. So he'll probably fall tiers short of those guys. But could he potentially be as impactful as a Tyler Hero? Could he potentially be as impactful as a Darius Garland? I think those would be, the closest I'm willing to say Emmanuel Quickly would get to being an all-star would be like a sub all-star, but that would be fantastic value at 32 million. I think a lot of people are still sort of shell-shocked by that contract, 32 million, but it is a flat contract. The Raptors are in a favorable draft, cap position. They do have 2 players at least concurrently developing around his position in Grady and Jacoby, who are less paid than him. They'll also have a rookie coming in next year who will be a high-ranked rookie who will be on a really, really cheap deal. You have Jameson Battle on a cheap deal. Potentially, you would offer him some sort of contract. And now that you have a roster space, he's been really good for you. Maybe you offer him a 3-year, $6 million type of deal. Boom. So now you tend to think from a roster construction perspective. You don't think individual players. You more think like blocks of players. Like, how much money do I have invested in my center position? And yeah, if one of those players is a bit of an overpaid veteran and one of those players is a top 5 pick, and sum total you're spending $30 million on your center position and you have a great center rotation, i.e. Daniel Gafford plus Derek Lively, one of the best center rotations in the league, also one of the cheapest center rotations in the league, right? It won't be cheap for long. Obviously, Derek Lively will at some point demand an extension, but until he does so, what a great piece to put next to Luka Doncic. Rookies who contribute within their first 2 years, especially high lottery rookies like Cason Wallace, and especially ones who contribute to winning. Cason Wallace, Amen Thompson, Victor Wembanyama. These are the real team building cheat code, for real. Scotty Barnes is another one. Anyways, For sure. Raven saying I'm on the same path personally, not taking everything that people say to heart. I'm more focused on good energy. Yeah, let me exit this live by saying this. I care what my people think. I don't necessarily care what everybody thinks. I'm not here for everybody. And I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years giving a lot of crap about the opinions of people who frankly don't matter in my day-to-day life. And there are people privately that I am friends with, people in the basketball world that their opinion does matter to me a lot. It matters to me because we're close. It matters to me because I trust them. It matters to me because I know what they're talking about. And when those people consistently come and tell me that, I really appreciate what you said about this, it's not being talked about, but hey, like, I'm really, really happy that someone's talking about this. And then a whole bunch of people on X don't like that I'm saying it. Well, I have to choose who to listen to. And that comes from confidence. Over a period of time, you just have to learn to trust your own voice, trust your own judgment, and again, trust that not everybody is for everybody. I think that that's a really important thing to realize, that the vast majority of basketball discussions, basketball debates that you're going to have online, you're not moving the post, you're not moving people, you're not going to convince somebody that thinks Cade Cunningham is better than Scotty Barnes, that Scotty Barnes is better because he posted some numbers, because the last 4 years didn't convince them. This year is not going to convince them. And maybe next year when Scotty laps him, he's all NBA and he's way better than him. Maybe that's not going to convince him either. So it's like, you're not really, people aren't looking to have debates online. They're looking to have echo chambers. And I think that it's really important to realize that when people have a problem with you, very often it is reflecting a problem they have with themselves as well, right? I'm not saying everyone who has a problem with you is batshit crazy. I'm just saying, because that's how people really do form echo chambers, is assuming everybody who's who disagrees with them is wrong. But I do think that if you're going to spend your time online trying to change the world's opinion about your favorite player or your favorite team, I mean, there are far more productive things to do. Try banging your head against the wall. That's probably just as productive. All right. Talk to you all later. Cass saying, big shout out to Big Ox. I'm not here for everybody. Big shout outs to Big Ox for that quote. Yep. I think about it at least 2 times a day. Talk to y'all later. Have a great, great night.